And now, with our lesson, Tim Junkins.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Time for a history lesson. Everybody loves a good history lesson on a Sunday morning. Really get things going, really get you excited. History, people. It's happening all around us. The year in question was 1977. 20th Century Fox was going to release its big movie of the summer. It had been in development for a while, and Fox was very excited about it. Of course, I'm talking about an American drama called The Other Side of Midnight. Now, wait a second. That's not the big movie of 1977. Now, of course, history has told us that the big movie of May 1977 was Star Wars. Star Wars was the big movie of the summer. It was the proprietor of the summer blockbuster. If you go and see any movie this summer, if you go and you see Jurassic World or any of those big budget blockbusters, the idea of that in 1977 was such a foreign concept that until the day that Star Wars opened, it was marked for failure. There was problems on set with the actors. The film went way over budget. Sets were destroyed by random storms. Millions and millions of dollars had been invested, and 20th Century Fox had sat around nervously trying to figure out how on earth a children's movie was going to recoup their money. And so they came up with a daring plan that they were going to sell Star Wars overseas to European investors in a vain attempt to recover their money. And then, in May of 1977, Star Wars opened to 32 theaters. Now think about that for a second. How many theaters could you name? How many theaters have you been to in your life? Just as a quick contrast, in the year 1980, when the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, launched, it opened in over 1,000 theaters. So what happened? People went to it. People really wanted to see it. And for almost the first time in history, people went again and again. There were people who went opening day, who walked out of the theater, and they walked right around to the ticket booth, and they bought another ticket, and they went back into the theater. And almost for the first time in history, that happened. But like I said, up until this point, George Lucas, the creator, the originator of Star Wars, had worked himself sick. He had been in the hospital multiple times. He invested what little money he had from his previous success, a film in the early 1970s called American Graffiti. He had taken the $4 million or so dollars he had made from that, and he had reinvested it into Star Wars. All the chips were on the table at this point. And until the day it came out, and until word of mouth built, and until it got into more theaters, it was marked for failure. To the point where the studio was ready to just sell it off, gone forever. And so, the story that I learned about this, about the history, it came from a book I'm reading about. It's really fascinating because it's very much not centered on being friendly to the creator. It tells a lot of very interesting, very dark stories about the backgrounds of the movies. But I found this the most interesting, that I couldn't imagine pouring my heart and my soul into a project that was marked for failure. That when everybody sat around, every time he showed a script, every time he showed a rough cut, his friends would go, I don't know, this was probably a bad idea. And then you jump forward, 30 plus years now, and you look at that, and you go, no, it's Star Wars. It's the biggest movie on the planet. It's one of the greatest selling of all time. It's been re-released and re-released and reintroduced to other generations, and it's gone on and on. And it's just one of those things where you look at that and you go, how could you not recognize this? And so it got me thinking about projects that we work on. Projects that we work on at work and at home. Passion projects we have. That thing that we've always wanted to do. That deck we've always wanted to build. That book we've always wanted to write. The something in our lives that is there. That when we work on it, we are, projects range from smooth sailing to catastrophic failure at the drop of a hat. No matter what it is. I'm part of projects at work where we sat around for weeks on end and we brainstormed and we busted our heads and we made it work. And then somebody came back a couple days later and said, do it differently. After weeks of effort out the window. And that's how it was for someone like George Lucas in the mid-1970s. Where people were coming to him, the special effects budget had gone way overboard, it didn't look good, he wasn't ready. It wasn't 25% of the movie that he thought it was in his head. And so it's one of those things where the reason I originally bring up The Other Side of Midnight is because that was the movie that Fox was banking on. That was the movie that said, okay, theater, if you want Other Side of Midnight, you've got to take this little independent film called Star Wars. And then, in June of 1977, they said, okay, theaters, if you want Star Wars, you're going to have to take this little side movie called The Other Side of Midnight. And success began ramping up and things started to get a little bit better. But it only got there because he worked until the last possible minute, until the day it was released to the public. How many projects have we bailed on halfway through, or 99% of the way through, or 99.9% of the way through? Where if we had just put in a couple more days, or a couple more weeks, or a couple more hours of good, solid, hard effort, would we have accomplished that project? I've got dozens of them on the back burner. I want to write a book one day. That'd be pretty cool to have my name on a book. And I promise, one day I'll get around to it. One day I'll put in the effort. One day I'll sit down at the keyboard and maybe write that first page I've been stewing around for the last however many years. The passage we're going to be reading out of today is Philippians chapter 2, on the idea of the effort that we put in. Looking at the idea of pass and fail. Today's lesson, pass/fail. Where's that line? Where's the line of succeeding? Where is the line of failure? How do we find it? How do we get past it? That's the big question. Think about your failed projects. Think about your successful ones. What are the things that we can take from that? What are the things that we can apply to our own faith as far as building towards the line of pass and fail? And of course, it opens with a pretty difficult question. That in our faith, in our lives, in our relationship with God Almighty Himself, there's a line of pass and failure. There is the right way to go about things, there is the wrong way to go about things. There are consequences for our actions. This originally started as an idea of what are we destined for as people? And I was going to propose the question of, was Star Wars destined to happen? Not really. It was a movie, and he made it work. And it got out there. But more importantly, when we look at our purpose, when we look at our destinies, there is a plan in place. God has implemented something. So Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. Now, of course, the author is talking about how much more important it is that they are followers of Christ in His absence. Because I don't want to refer to him as a supervisor, but when we have a supervisor kind of looming over, when we've got someone there to hold our hand to get us started, it's the way like my other job works, is I had a couple of months of somebody sitting there with me and saying, okay, well, here's how you do it. No, don't do that. All right, here's how you correct that mistake. Here's how you do it. And then a couple months later, that person wasn't there anymore. And I was left to my own devices. And in the same way, to the Philippians, they had somebody there. They had a teacher, and they had a mentor, and they had an instructor. And now that person is just checking in on them. And he's thrilled that much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. And he's really hammering the point home that you guys are making it work. More importantly, you're making it work when I'm not there sitting on top of you. You're doing this on your own. Because God is in you, and He is encouraging you on in the tasks at hand. Going down to verse 14, and I apologize because this is going to upset a lot of people. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. When I was a young Christian, and this line was introduced to me, I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Without grumbling and complaining, it's a tough sell, God. It's a tough sell because I love complaining. I'm so good at it. I might be the best. But it's one of those things where he really wants to emphasize the message of how we have to separate ourselves from that attitude, from that mentality, from the people who I had been around for so long who said it's okay to grumble and complain. It's okay to get upset. It's okay to block out the world and to block out all the good and just focus on the anger and focus on the tension. But we do this so that we may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in pain. It's one of those things where it's really focusing on the idea of when we workshop ourselves. I talked about a lot of different projects. I talked about movies and decks and books and home improvements and things like that. But this is the thing that we need to work on. It's the thing that we need to not procrastinate on. It's the thing, I don't know if I'm ever going to get that book out there, but if I do, I assume you're all going to buy it. Right? Come on, it's me, you guys. I wrote a book now. But it's one of those things where when you look at this is the thing that we need to focus on as people. As children of God, as followers of Christ, we need to workshop ourselves to work towards the end goal of pleasing God. Now, the tough sell on this is much like on a very minor scale, much like it was for George Lucas with Star Wars, ours is going to be until the day the project is done, which is the day that we're done, the day that we're done here. And so there are going to be hiccups. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be catastrophes. And that's the thing I really wish I could promise you guys that was not going to happen. I would love to tell you that there will be no catastrophes, there will be no setbacks, there will be no barriers in our way. I would love to tell you guys that. But I get to be the bearer of bad news in this situation. But that being said, we have to remember what was spoken earlier in the passage about, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. We have God in us. God is with us. God does not work specific hours. God does not take vacations. God does rest, but so do we. But it is one of those things where God is always with us throughout these projects, whether it's a home improvement project or whether it's a spiritual home improvement project. When we're looking internal to ourselves and we're saying, God, what do I really need to fix? What's that commercial expression? Never stop improving? I think it applies here. And it's one of those things where we will continue to work, we will continue to struggle, we will continue to strive to be better for God. Looking at verse 17. But even if I am poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too shall be glad and rejoice with me. It's one of those things that's even tougher to swallow than the grumbling and arguing thing. Grumbling and arguing, okay. It took me a little while as a young Christian, but I came around to that idea that that's one of the things we need to work on. We need to work towards the idea of being a better, more content in our faith Christian. That's something I had come around to. But even if I am poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And that's the thing where, that's one thing I need to work on. One of many. That's one of those things where when you sit down and you're working on a project, you map out a checklist. What are we going to fix today? What are we going to work on today? How are we going to do it? What's our timetable? What are the resources we need? And at least for myself, when I sit down and I really look at that checklist and I really look at the little tiny things day to day. You know, it's a lot like in the house I'm at. There was a small leak in the roof. And there was a little tiny hole in one of the pipes. And there was a little tiny leak. And as far as our spiritual home improvement, it works a lot like that. A lot of it isn't a big deal. A lot of it isn't a catastrophe. But those are the things that we need to pay the most attention to. Because like things like that, I could look at that and go, oh, well, that's not that bad. It's probably not going to get worse, right? And so I ignore it. And I ignore it, and I ignore it. And then all of a sudden I wake up one day, and things have gotten worse. Big shock, right? And so, as much as the big things, as much as the catastrophes, as much as the things that we need to immediately fix, the long-term things we also need to address so they don't get worse. We need to strive so that they'll get better. Do we shine like stars in the sky? Mind you, not Star Wars, but do we shine like stars in the sky? Do we shine in the way that we are holding on to the word of life? Do we hold on to it? It is a part of our daily meditation. It is a part of our daily communication with God. Or is it every other day? Or is it every third day? Or is it once a week on a Sunday morning? I am equally guilty in all of these things as much as anybody else in this room. This lesson is not intended to target. It is not intended to specifically target. I'm not going to start pointing fingers and yelling out names and calling out faults. But it is one of those things that I ask you to reflect on that on a personal level. To really look at the spiritual maintenance that we have as people and ask yourself in a really honest and open way, God, what can I fix today? Start with the little things. Start with the patch jobs. Start with the things that will only get worse. And ramp your way up to the big, ambitious projects. Fix the things in your life that need to be addressed. And then go out and help others fix theirs. I'm not handy at all. I have zero handyman skill. If there was a number to describe my handyman skill, that number would in fact be 0. And so when I run into situations that require attention, I reach out for help. Because I'm a smart person. And I understand if I try to just look this up on the internet by myself, I'm probably going to wind up making a bigger hole. And so I reach out and I find people who understand what is going on. I have 0 car skill. It's the same thing. I've never done a minute's work on my car in my life. I've never changed the oil. I've never anything like that. Because I'm terrified of it. Very, very openly terrified of those sorts of things. And so it's one of those things where we look at those and people are like, wow, Tim's really bad at a lot of things. I have good strengths too, but they're just not mechanical. Your computer's broken, come call me. But it's one of those things that when we look at the skills that we have, when we reach out to people, we have mentors and peers and people that we can turn to who can help us patch up those, spiritual holes in our life. We have people that we can communicate with. We have a congregation here of people who have different strengths and abilities and things like that, and that is one of the things I'm good at. It's talking about that sort of thing. So I'm pulling my weight, it's cool. Do we shine like stars? Because that's the goal. To be pure and blameless in a warped and crooked generation as described in Philippians 2. Do we shine like stars? Or do we shine not like stars? A little dimmer, a little quieter? But no, that's what we're called to do. We're called to shine like stars, because stars, at least outside of the city, are a definite presence. Something that you can look up and you can see. Something that you can look up and understand and be amazed by. But even if I'm poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Words of encouragement. That we are not suffering alone. That there are those that have come before us, at this point a couple thousand years worth, who have lived and they have died in the name of Christ. They have lived and died so they could bring us things like the Scriptures. That they survived attempts to be destroyed. That there was times in our history where somebody decided that they had enough of this God fellow and they're going to go out there and they're going to destroy the Bibles and they're going to wipe this out once and for all. Bad news, buddy. It's 2015. We've still got it. We've got our books, we've got our tablets, we've got our computers, we've got our audio Bibles, we've got it in every way, shape, and form. Because despite the best efforts of man, God has proven himself time and time again that he is almighty, and he is powerful, and he is ready to deal with the naysayers. And when we look at that, when we look at people like Paul, who writes these letters, these amazing heartfelt letters, and he writes these words of encouragement, and you know that he has God inside of him, he is Jesus inside of him, I look at that and I go, I want to be part of that. That is the God I believe in. That is the Christ I believe in. That is the one that I'm going to follow. That's the one I'm going to bank on. And I'm going to work every single day until my project is done. And then I'm going to see what comes of it. And I'm going to be gone from this world and I'm going to see God face to face. And I'm going to say, Lord, I tried my best. And even though that's not the purpose, even though it's not about accruing points, it's not accruing currency, it's not about any of those things. But it's just about following him. It's about putting faith in him. About knowing that the things that were talked about at the table this morning really resonated with me. To know that he died painfully so that we could be free. So I ask you, look at your failed projects. Look at your successful projects. Take that knowledge, build upon it, so that we can spiritually improve ourselves and reach the line of passing. If you're here today, and this message has connected with you in some way, and you're looking for prayer, if you're here today and you want to be part of that, and you want to sign up for that, and you want to embrace that, if you want to change your life for the better, the waters of baptism are always available. I ask you to contemplate these things as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
I heard an old story.